जगदीश सर आप स्टार्ट कर दो सर अनम्यूट करके.
Shall I start then?
Yes
Sir,
sir,
this is
please.
sir. Yeah. So today's next probably half an hour is on clinical examination of the foot and ankle. It's an often neglected area because probably the joint seems a little inferior to the hips and spines and knees usually kept in the exam. The problem is if you land up with a case and you are unprepared in a good examination of the foot and ankle, sometimes you have very little to say. So it is good that you have a protocol in mind when you present a foot and ankle case also. So that is exactly what I'm doing. I will just give you a schema, a algorithm on how to examine the foot and ankle, and you can apply it to all cases. Whether you land up with a neglected CTV, a body of talus fracture with avian, ankle arthritis, subtalar arthritis, old Lisfrancs, the schema is the same. The order of examination is the same. I think it was Leonardo da Vinci who said that the foot is an engineering masterpiece and a work of art. It's a very complex area. There are far too many joints. None of the two joints actually move in the same plane. There are large number of bones, ligaments, and muscles, and it's a complex structure. It is flexible, yet it is sturdy. So when you are pushing off the ground, the entire foot becomes a rigid lever and helps you to push off. Whereas it also plays a role in balance and a shock absorbing function. Some people have compared the foot to a twisted plate structure. Lamina pedis is actually the technical description, where the foot is believed to be a series of interconnected joints which can itself as well as loosen itself and become from rigid to supple in a matter of seconds. So the anatomy itself is complex. So a foot and ankle case, a case in the exam, foot and ankle in the exam can come into
Said Salar, third time I am reminding you. Yes sir, please go ahead.
yes. So the foot and ankle becomes relevant as a postgraduate when you actually get the case as a foot and ankle short case, with the DNB giving equal precedence to all ways of clinical examination. Obviously, it is as important as the hip or spine. Sometimes you might have a hip, you might have a main case focus of area separately, and the examiner might draw your attention to the foot and ask you that there is an obvious deformity in the foot and ankle. What do you think this is? So you should be ready to answer that. Sometimes, for example, you might get poliomyelitis and you're examining the spine with paralytic scoliosis. Your focus may be on scoliosis, but it could so happen that the same patient has a paralytic foot deformity, and the examiner might actually, turn your focus there, and you should do well there also. So these are the two situations where a foot and ankle case will come. Now, the most important part I feel as an examiner is the description. The foot examination is essentially a descriptive narrative of the findings. Very often we have the student coming forward and saying there is an ulcer on the metatarsal. There is a discoloration over the talus. Now, the thing to remember here is there are correct terminologies for distribution of the foot. There is the hind foot, the midfoot, and the forefoot. So when you describe anything on the foot, especially on inspection, it is good to say that there is an ulcer on the forefoot overlying or underlying the second metatarsal or the first metatarsal. So when you describe to the examiner the areas of the foot, it is best to use this classification rather than say you know, over the middle cuneiform there is something, or over the navicular you find something. Now the distribution, the boundary lines between the hind foot, midfoot, and the forefoot are the Lisfranc and the Chopart joints. The Lisfranc joints, the tarsometatarsal joints, separate the forefoot from the midfoot. And the Choparts, that is the transverse tarsal joints, the talocalcaneal and the calcaneocuboid, separate the midfoot from the hindfoot. The hindfoot essentially calcaneum, though we say the talus and calcaneum, the hindfoot is, so if you say that there is a hindfoot varus, or there is a ulcer or a swelling on the hindfoot, you are actually implying that the swelling is in the calcaneal area. We normally conventionally don't include the talus, because if there is a swelling around the talus, we kind of describe it as an ankle swelling rather than a hindfoot swelling. So remember that the hindfoot is almost exclusively the calcaneus, and any pathology around the talus is in the territory of the ankle. The forefoot contains the metatarsal and the phalanges. Remember, the first metatarsal is shorter. Sometimes when you want to find the joint line of the metatarsophalangeal joint in the first, remember that the metatarsal is usually shorter. The metatarsal is again a unique bone. Remember, this is the only long bone in the body which actually bears weight on its transverse axis. The tibia, the femur, all bear weight in its longitudinal axis. But the foot, all the 5 metatarsals act like together, and they share the weight. The first metatarsal being short also gives a supinating torque during push-off, and that causes the foot to become rigid. So this description, if you remember, in your inspection, it will be a great help. That is hindfoot, midfoot, and the forefoot distributions. Now the history is not different from any other area. These are the typically 4 or 5 areas that we expand the history on. It would be the same like a hip joint or a knee joint, where you will first ask the patient about the pain, the direction, the duration, the location, qualifying, aggravating, relieving factors, whether pain is present at rest, pain is present on the first step, pain is so severe that the patient is unable to weight bear and requires a walking aid. So you develop your histories in the same way. Swelling also in the foot can be directly related to the joints. You can get a Lisfranc injury and midfoot swelling. You can get a first metatarsal swelling in gout, which is one of the commonest things. In the foot, the deformities are one of the most prominent things that you should be able to describe. So as a postgraduate, if you're able to describe correctly the deformities, 75% of the foot and ankle description is done. So if you correctly identify the foot as a cavo varus, a calcaneo valgus, that itself is credit worthy, and that is about 70-75% of your examination. The rest only follows that there are a few special tests that you do. Stiffness in the foot and ankle is actually almost a direct correlation to pain. So it usually is seen in arthritis. Sometimes you get early morning stiffness, but stiffness and pain are interchangeably used in the foot. Instability is a rare symptom and usually presents like recurrent ankle sprains or recurrent foot sprains, and they can be a hidden symptom of instability or ligamentous injury. Obviously, any foot and ankle, remember the foot and ankle bears the entire weight of the body in a single stance, which is actually more than 8 to 10 times the body weight in terms of force vectors. And any small aberration in this will cause a change in the gait pattern. So these are the usual symptoms that you develop on. Now, there are certain caveats. Once you have developed the history, you have to examine. Now, it is very important to actually expose at least till the knee. But if your history says that there is a foot deformity and there was some surgery done in the back, or the patient has some deformity in the hip, then you must examine hip and spine. So you could have a case like a open spina bifida with, or a spina bifida, it could be occulta also, with a foot deformity. The general examination mandates that you must say something about the spine. Now, sometimes the patient stands with extremely external rotation and you find that the foot are pointed outwards. Now, it could so happen that the problem is in the hip. There is a deformity there. And what you're seeing in the foot is a manifestation of the hip deformity. So it is good to examine the hip and spine also. Hand and feet usually go together. Sometimes you have arthritis, which is common in the hands and feet. So if you have significant arthritis in the feet, you must look at the hands also. Olier's disease is a small multiple enchondromatosis is another disease which can cause changes in both the hand and feet. Remember that they tend to go together. You must also keep this area in mind. Sometimes the foot is a mirror of the systemic disease. You might get leprosy, and you might find that there are deformities, but the problem is actually not located to the foot alone, but the entire body may be involved. Gout is another example where the foot becomes the index primary manifestation of the systemic disease. Sometimes edema might be so evident only that that could be the harbinger of a systemic disease. It is also good in a foot case to put a word on the footwear that the patient uses, whether there is any special pattern of wear and tear of the foot. So you can find if the child has a foot drop, you'll find the front of the shoe, the toe of the boot scuffed up. Or if the person has a varus, you can find that the outer part of the heel touches the ground first, and therefore that part of the heel of the shoe is worn out faster. So it is good to look at the patient's footwear and the walking aid that the patient uses. The orthosis, sometimes the surgical boot also you can describe in a foot and ankle case. The patient uses a HFO, HKFO, or an AFO with a T-strap is also allowed in a foot and ankle case. Again, I like the description should also include the gait. Just an example where you feel that the problem is alone in the foot and you expose further, and if you just are focused, the child is wearing trousers, or a lady is shy enough not to expose her knees, and you find that you make a diagnosis of pes planus, whereas the primary problem seems to be a genu valgum. So it is good to expose at least till the knee, the hip and the spine if the history so warrants. So this is the schema of examination. The foot is examined both sitting, that is non-weight bearing, as well as standing, which is weight bearing, because deformities can change, deformities can get accentuated. Classical example, if you can remember, is a flexible pes cavus. When the patient stands, pes planus, sorry. So when you find the patient has flat foot, but when the foot is off the ground, you'll find that at least a small arch is seen. So it makes sense to examine both weight bearing and non-weight bearing. The first thing, like in all cases, what you do is inspection. So you inspect the patient from the front, from the sides, which is both the sides, and the back. You can climb from distal to proximal, which means you can work your way from the toes, the forefoot, the midfoot, the hindfoot, the ankle, and climb into the tibia and the leg. One way to make sure that you have done it in a proper protocol and you don't miss findings is to follow a pattern. You can choose either one. There is no right or wrong here. It is more of convenience, and it is designed so that you don't forget some areas. The crux areas, the missing areas, the blind areas are sometimes, example, the sole. You describe the foot very well, and then you miss a callosity. It may not be a matter of life and death, but it will be always, it will not be nice for the examiner to know that you have examined the sole and you have found out that there is a callosity, a fissure, or an ulcer, which can be described. Similarly, the skin between the toes is also one of the hidden areas which you should actually spread out the toes. Sometimes you might get a neuropathic foot from diabetes with a midfoot Chopard collapse. And it may so happen that the patient has intertrigo, a fungal infection in the web space. And if you pick it up, it's good. Brownie points for you. You would have got something extra. Now, the palpation also again can be proximal to distal. You can palpate from the malleolus, ankle joint, talus, work your way distally, hind foot, midfoot, the toes. Again, just a pattern to make sure that you do it in an order and don't miss. Movements of the joints, the typical joints that you really examine are the ankle and the subtalar. You can also examine the metatarsophalangeal joint, which may show stiffness or hypermobility, or the interphalangeal joints. Measurements in the foot can be done. Sometimes if you have a neuropathic pes cavus, you will find that one foot is significantly smaller than the other. It is clinically obvious, but sometimes the measurements are not very well described in the foot and ankle, though you sometimes do a circumferential measurement of the ankle, and sometimes you measure from the tip of the malleolus to the floor also, basically to say whether the collapse is there or not. After this, you move in for a neurovascular assessment, muscle testing, some special tests, and you can end by describing the gait. So this is the usual schema which is popular in the foot and ankle examination. So in these inspection, usually you would go the normal way. You would describe any scars, surgical or otherwise, the presence of sinuses, whether they are active or they are healed, whether they are discharging, what is the discharge, the ulcers, whether there is any skin discoloration, the description of any swelling, prominences, the loss of the skin creases. All this you can describe. Remember, the foot and ankle is actually a purely descriptive kind. For example, we keep saying a child with CTV. If you make a diagnosis of congenital talipes equinovarus, there are no really great marks for the diagnosis, because sometimes you ask the mother, she'll tell you my child is suffering from CTV, isn't it? So as a examining doctor, you have to qualify it better. And the marks for that, the thrust of that is how you have described the foot. This is smaller than the other, these creases are absent, these creases are present, this is the deformity that is seen. So that description is the one that gives you the marks when you're describing the club foot. So remember that it has to be a continuous and a good description of the deformities. Similarly, the presence of varicosity, wasting, and footwear also can be done. So remember that it is good if you know the names of deformities, rather than saying the big toe is pointed laterally and the small toe is looking south. It is better to give them the correct terminology. So you can say there is a hallux valgus and a hallux, which is the commonest great toe deformity. Hallux varus, which is relatively rare. Hallux rigidus is a stiff MTP joint with swelling dorsally. So that's a hallux rigidus. The lesser toes have deformities, which are essentially the claw, hammer, and the mallet toes. We are differentiated by the claw toe having hyperextension at the MTP joint and flexion at both PIP and DIP joints. The mallet is a pure distal flexion, DIP flexion, whereas a hammer toe is a PIP flexion. So if you know what you see, you can say that there is a hammer toe deformity of the second, third, and fourth toe. So that gives an impression to the examiner that you know what you're talking about. A bunion and a bunion on the greater toe, that is on the first MTP joint. If you have a soft tissue swelling, that's a bunion. A similar swelling on the fifth side is called a bunionette. A Taylor's bursite used to be called, that's a bunionette. Callosity is a thickened skin, typically occurs due to friction or weight bearing. So you can describe a callosity. Similarly, you should, once you finish the toes, you come to the forefoot and describe the forefoot. You come to the midfoot, describe the midfoot deformities, and describe the hindfoot. You go up to the ankle. If there's an ankle deformity, you speak about the ankle and then move on to the leg. So you come from the toe all the way to the ankle in a to the leg in a description. Now that's a hallux valgus. The first picture, I'm not. I think I'm not getting the pointer on, but that is a hallux valgus. You can see the toe going out. You can see the small redness at the MTP joint medially. That's the bunion. So the two are hallux. The one you see on the top is, yeah, exactly. So that is the hallux valgus. You can see a bunion. Now, if you put your finger on this joint, you will find medially the metatarsal head is actually a little rough and irregular. So this is a bunion. Second one is also a hallux valgus. This is what we call a crossover toe. A crossover toe is when the second metatarsal starts drifting. It starts drifting basically because the volar plate is damaged, and it crosses over to the other toe. The last photo and all, you can see the description, what we call a hammer toe. You can see the second, the one on the extreme right, on my extreme right, you can see the second toe and the third toe, they are dropped. The PIP is in flexion. The DIP is straight. Okay, so this is a hammer toe. If only the DIP was flexed, we would have called it a mallet. If the PIP is flexed, we would have called it a hammer. If there is hyperextension with flexion of both the joints, we would call it a claw toe. So it's good to know these descriptions. This is another hammer toe. You can see that the proximal interphalangeal joints are flexed. You can also see these superficial ulcers and damage to the nail, which occurs because now the toe, the pulp of the toe is pointing to the floor. And as the patient walks, he's dragging the toe. So you tend to get ulcers, irregularities, and nail bed damages there when you're in a hammer toe. This is an interesting feature. It's actually more of an Indian or Asian feature. It's called brachymetatarsia. It's a small metatarsal. Very clinical significance is not much. Some recent papers have described lengthening procedures for a brachymetatarsa. Both the toes you see is well demonstrated here that they are at the same level. Typically, it occurs in the fourth metatarsal, typically, brachymetatarsa. Very clinical significance, okay, just a congenital finding, though there are a few papers on lengthening, cosmetically. So the one on the greater toe side, on the preaxial side is the bunion. The soft tissue swelling is the bunion. On the fifth side, the postaxial side is the bunion end. On the fifth end, that's a bunion and a bunion. So it's good if you know these terms. That's a dorsal bunion. That's a dorsal bunion that is typically associated with the hallux rigidus. That is a dorsal bunion, and hallux rigidus means that the toe has become stiff. It's a manifestation of osteoarthritis of the first MTP joint. And this is where you get the swelling. You get the swelling dorsally vis-a-vis a medial swelling in a hallux valgus. Callosity, like we said, it is good to describe. See, if you had missed this, if you had not examined the foot, you would have missed this finding. This shows that there is excessive weight bearing. Now, if just looking at this callosity, you know that the MTP joint is being flexed. When you see volarly, it will be flexed. The metatarsal heads are actually bearing weight in the third and fourth area, which normally doesn't occur. So be vigilant and look at the sole. So this is a list of the deformities that are possible at the foot. Toe deformities, we have said that. The hallux valgus, the lesser toe, the claw toe, the mallet toe, the hammer toe. Forefoot adduction, just like you see your CTV. Forefoot adduction, typically it occurs at the Lisfranc, tarsometatarsal, and the forefoot abduction that you see in a pes plano valgus. The skew foot, you might see abduction. The apex of the arch is in the midfoot. The transverse metatarsal arch is in the midfoot. So whenever you see an arch problem, it will be in the middle of the foot. So you can have no arch, which is a pes planus. You can have excessive arch, which is a pes cavus. You can actually have the arch reversed and it becomes a rocker bottom. So that's a midfoot deformity. In the hindfoot, typically you speak of equinus, which is actually ankle dorsiflexion and the calcaneum getting flexed. Calcaneus is when the calcaneus becomes vertical. Varus valgus refers to the deviation of the calcaneum vis-a-vis the tibia. So these are the deformities you could describe. Metatarsus adductus, 4 foot adduction, 4-foot adduction with normal heel, a common condition. Similarly here, if you look at the foot, especially if you look at the left foot, you'll find that the heel is straight. It's not gone into varus like a CTV. So this is a metatarsus adductus. So you have different grades. Sometimes you can get something like a metatarsus adductus with a valgus heel. So whereas a CTV you get a varus heel, here you'll get the opposite. The foot, 4-foot is in varus and the hind foot is in valgus. That is your skew foot or your serpentine foot as it is called. So that description is called a skew foot. It's called a type 3 metatarsus adductus. So skew foot also you've seen. This is another pretty common one which you see in your clinics is an accessory navicular. This is a midfoot swelling. The navicular is prominent. It just could be a prominent tuberosity of navicular, or it could be an accessory center, typically associated with pes planus. Again, good if you know these names and what are they associated with. Pes cavus, a high arch foot, you should be able to discover. You should know how to describe it and say that this, again, as we said, it's a midfoot problem. Pes cavus. The one on this side, the smaller photograph, is what we call a neurological pes cavus, because not only there is a cavus, the lesser toe, you have the first metatarsal drop, you have the cocking up of the first of the great toe. So this is what we call a neurological pes cavus. This warrants, the moment you see this wasted foot with a high cavus, intrinsic wasting, immediately you must search for a neurological cause. It could be a spina bifida, it could be a generalized cause, Friedreich's ataxia, something like that. But you must at least, the thought should spark that we must look for a neurological problem. Okay, especially when the unilateral foot is smaller, especially when there is atrophy of the calf and you see toe deformities with ulcers, which are actually a manifestation of sensory loss. Hereditary motor sensory neuropathies present like this. This earlier used to be, in our days, this used to be called the Charcot-Marie. They now go under the name of hereditary motor sensory neuropathies. So this you should remember, the neurological pes cavus. Pes planus is a flat foot when there is no arch. This is another variety, whereas that is you have a flat foot, but you have the peroneal tendon standing out. This is called a peroneal spastic flat foot. Usually indicates the pathology, means two things. One, that it is painful. Two, usually the subtalar joint is to blame. Either there is an arthritis there or there is a tarsal coalition there. It may also occur in some kinds of cerebral palsy where there is a primary problem with the muscle. So when you see a pes planus, look on the lateral side and look for the peroneal tendon standing out. Clinically, your diagnosis is a peroneal spastic flat foot. Common differentials, subtalar arthritis, tarsal coalition. This is the other arch. The arch now is pointing in the other direction. This is a rocker bottom foot. And the congenital condition that you commonly see it is a congenital vertical talus, where you see these problems. Again, coming to the heel, heel, valgus, and varus, you should be able to describe. You can see how the heel is going outwards and inwards in respective conditions. Sometimes if you feel that, especially if the foot is swollen, it's sometimes good to draw lines on the center of the tendo Achilles and the heel bisector and see the angle. And remember that normally we have that little bit of valgus, just like the knee, the hind foot is also in a little bit of valgus. Little bit of valgus is tolerated, and varus at the heel usually is very symptomatic. Equinus, we know that is the tiptoe deformity where the calcaneum is in flexion, plantar flexion. Calcaneum is the opposite. What we used to becomes thickened, expanded velocities, and we find that the tibia and the talus are actually in the same line. There is no offset of the calcaneum. It is one straight line from the leg to the heel. That's a calcaneal deformity, calcaneus. And remember, you can get calcaneus, Talipus equinocabovarus, commonest that you see in paralytic polio, commonest that you see in CTV. Talipus calcaneovarus, which is actually a relatively rare thing. Again, paralytic. Calcaneovalgus, which is a little more common than this, which can occur in paralytic, typically in paralysis or weakness of the tendo Achilles. You get these. Sometimes a very rare form is equinovalgus. So remember that there are deformities and they tend to occur in combination. So identify them correctly. The first one on the left is a you can see the midfoot swelling. You can see a midfoot break. You can see the forefoot is gone into valgus and the hind foot has gone also into valgus. It's a pes plano valgus. This is actually a traumatic case. This person is with a Lisfranc ligament injury, a severe twisting injury to the foot, and presented like this with a plano valgus. Remember, the midfoot is the height of the arch. So if there is tenderness or there is some pathology, the arch will change if it is a midfoot pathology. The one next to that is a CTV, recurrent CTV. You can see the cavovarus. You can see that the lateral border is curved and longer than the medial border. You can see that little bit of equinus, the heel is off the ground. While as the one in the bottom is the typical neurological foot. You can see wasting around the intrinsics. You can see that there is, you can see that there is extreme cavus. The first metatarsal is dropped. It is plantar flexed and the toes are cocked forward. There is hyperextension at the MTP, a typical neurological foot, cavovarus deformity with first metatarsal drop. So remember that no inspection of the foot is complete without the sole being examined. Look for ulcers, callosities, fissures, and scars. Palpation by far for the surgeon. Remember, a surgeon is one who uses his hands. So in clinical examination, it is palpation. In treatment, probably it is surgery that a surgeon should focus on. So palpate for tendon. Palpating the foot is an art because the anatomy is so complex. You should know which bone is where. It's an exam. It is an exam in surface anatomy to palpate the foot. You should know where the ankle joint line is. You should know where the tendons are. You see so commonly an ankle sprain. You should know where the anterior talofibular ligament is. You should know where the syndesmotic ligament is. The entire foot is palpation is an art in clinical examination. So you palpate for bone, for joints, for tendons, for fascia. You look for thickening, irregularity, and tenderness. And follow a pattern. It's always good. Don't jump at the obvious deformity. Look at the toes. Look at the forefoot. Look at the midfoot before you jump into a heel valgus. Palpate, go not only the heel valgus, go up towards the leg also. Like we said before, it's a chapter in surface anatomy. Where is the lateral malleolus? Where is the medial malleolus? You join these two lines and about 1 centimeter above, you know that the ankle joint line is there. If you palpate deeply, you can palpate the body of the talus, the navicular, the tuberosity of the navicular, the calcaneocutaneous. So if I draw a line from the tip of the lateral malleolus to the prominence, again, I don't have a pointer, to the prominence of the base of the 5th metatarsal. So if you look at this picture, you can see that the lateral malleolus is prominent, and somewhere in the midfoot, forefoot junction, the 5th metatarsal base is also prominent there. Somewhere in the midpoint of this line is your calcaneocuboid joint. The base of the 5th, not the base, yeah, the base actually, not the thing. So there in the middle is the calcaneocuboid joint. So you can elicit tenderness. Remember that bony tenderness in the foot is usually longitudinally aligned. So somebody who has got a stress fracture of the metatarsal, a Morton's metatarsal, and they have pain, you ask them about pain, with their hand they will show a longitudinal pain. They will point to their foot and draw a vertical line on their foot. Pain from the other joints, that is not from the bone but from the articular surface, is oriented axially or transversely or coronally. So you ask the patient and he has an arthritis or he has a Lisfranc joint injury, he'll do this to his foot. He'll say the pain is all over. So he will show a coronal pattern or he will show a transverse pattern at the ankle. So if it is longitudinally, it is usually the metatarsals. So it is good to know your surface anatomy. Your hands, the tip of your hands should see the bone underneath. You should be able to see. You should be able to palpate the accessory navicular. Plantar fasciitis, the base of the calcaneum. So the entire clinical examination is an art in palpation. Then you come to movements. Typically the major joints that you see, the ankle, again, this is a place where postgraduate makes a lot of mistakes. You hold the foot and move it like a lever and then you demonstrate ankle movements. Remember that little bit of play is occurring at all joints. It is occurring at the transverse tarsal joints, at the mid-tarsal joints, at the metatarsophalangeal joint. So when you catch the toes and try to dorsiflex and demonstrate ankle, you are getting an additive flexion in all these joints. So how do you isolate? You grasp the calcaneum. You grasp the calcaneum, not the forefoot, but the hind foot, and move and show ankle movements. Subtalar movements, a classical description is to dorsiflex the ankle, to lock the talus in the mortise, and then do an inversion-eversion movement. Record them. The movement of the subtalar is an extremely complex movement, but for simplicity's sake, it is inversion-eversion. Also, you can look at flexibility of the foot. This sometimes you tell in CTV, you say partially correctable. So how do you do that? You pull at the foot and find that it is almost coming to neutral. Or you say it is rigid. So there's no movement at the forefoot. So you can quantify the movements of the MTP and IP joints also. Once you have finished movements, you have to do a very detailed neurological examination. It's as tricky as the hand. People tend to remember the hand innervation well, but forget about all coming close to the foot and ankle. You should know them. You should also know the nerve supply, the peroneals, the superficial and deep, what deficit will occur in a common peroneal, what deficit will occur in a tibial nerve. In fact, a good sensory examination of the foot is the best way to localize the lesion. If it is sole, then it is a tibial nerve. It is sole from dorsum, it is both these. If it is the first web, it is the deep peroneal. If it is the rest of the foot, it is superficial peroneal. So all these combinations you can do. So it is, you have to do a detailed neurovascular examination. 10% of the people, the dorsalis pedis is usually absent. Confirm on the opposite side. Also put a word on distal vascularity, whether the capillary fill is good, whether the toe is dusky, whether there is hyperpigmentation or a purplish hue in the toes. So this is the neurovascular examination. This is ankle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Slides are not there. Muscle testing, again, very difficult area, and unless you have done it before, you will make a meal out of it in the exam. So typically the tibialis anterior or the peroneals I have seen, especially the peroneals, are quite difficult to do, and unless you know how to do it. So go through all the muscles, know how to do an MRC grading, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 grading of these muscles, how to elicit them, how to do at least a grade 3 exam, anti-gravity, how to do. So typical question is demonstrate grade 3 power in the tibialis anterior. You should know how to, where to place the foot. You should know that the foot should now move in the vertical plane against gravity. So do a good muscle charting. So you've done a neurological examination, you've done a motor examination, and then tests for flexibility. These are the special tests that you do. You know about a Sylvius-Gold. The Sylvius-Gold test differentiates, typically done in cerebral palsy, where you differentiate between a soleus and a gastrocnemius contracture, isn't it? When you get increased dorsiflexion, when you flex the knee, which kind of takes, when you flex the knee, you take the soleus out of the equation. The toe raising test, tests for heel flexibility. So you find a deformity, like if you see the first photograph, this is a valgus heel. And then you can say that the patient has a valgus deformity of the hind foot. But when you ask the patient to rise on his toes, you will find now that the heels have slipped into varus. This shows that this deformity is not fixed. It is a mobile deformity. So this is the toe raising test. The Coleman block. The Coleman block test tests the pes cavus. Again, it's a concept that you should read up and understand. Basically, a plantar flex, it helps to differentiate whether the hind foot is flexible or not. In a plantar flexed first ray, when you have cavo-varus deformity, it will tell you whether the hind foot is involved, is primary or secondary, or whether the deformities are fixed. So if you have a Coleman block test and you find that the heel varus is fixed, then you have to do some surgery which addresses both the forefoot and the hind foot. If you find it is flexible, when you solve the forefoot problem, the hind foot automatically will get corrected. The Sherman Coleman from Utah, he described the Coleman's block test, and essentially involves removing the first metatarsal from the equation by placing a block laterally on the foot. The Jack test tells you that the cavus is flexible. So you have dorsiflexed the big toe. Now you see the what we call the windlass action of the plantar fascia has tightened, and you see an arch has formed. Typically occurs in ligamentous laxity, small children who have flexible foot. And these are, remember, these are not rigid, these are flexible. Only then the arch will form. Some other tests I've added, which could be situational specific. The Thompson's is the rupture of the tendoachilles. Squeeze is also coming there. Sometimes the squeeze is doing, and the external rotation tests are done for syndesmotic injuries. So you dial the foot in external rotation, and the syndesmosis pain typically, because this is again one of the missed injuries that you get. What people treat as an ankle sprain actually is syndesmotic sprain. So the external rotation tells you where the pain is and localizes the pathology. Then you come to the gait. Remember that talk about the symmetry, which means both sides are identical. Cadence is the speed and the stride length. The rhythm, whether the patient has an antalgia, which is the pain component. Foot drop. If the patient has less mobility in the ankle, you can ask them to squat, and you will see that they are not able to squat and the heels come off. So he has to slip into a equinus pose when he's squatting. That tells you that the ankles are stiff. Curling of the toes, or remember the photograph I showed you for the neurological pes cavus. That is a cocked up first toe, an overactive first toe, all pointers towards intrinsic weakness. And the Jack tests where there is a flexible foot. So it's good to tell. So if you see a patient walking bare, he's put his foot on the ground, you see a pes planus. When he lifts it in a stride, you find when it's off the ground, you see a small arch form. So that also can be described in the gait. So this is coming to the end of the presentation. This is just a summary. Take a relevant history, do a relevant general examination. It follows the same pattern. Measurements are probably not very important in the foot and ankle. Do an inspection, describe the deformities, palpate each part religiously. Your history points towards which area of focus of palpation you have to do. Check movements. When you check movements, describe them typically in degrees. It is good to focus on how to do ankle and subtalar movement. Do a good neuromuscular assessment. Most of the special tests in the foot are tests for the flexibility, whether they're the Silverskiol, the Jacks. The tests essentially are testing for flexibility of the foot. The Coleman block test is also that. And end by describing the gait. You can also say the gait in the beginning. Sometimes some examiners like that the most prominent finding is spoken first. So that is just a general schema how to do a foot and ankle exam. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jagdish sir. I'll request Gopa Kumar sir to comment. Gopa Kumar sir. Kakatkar sir.
Yeah, I think Jagdish should was an excellent, and I think so many small points have been very nicely covered, and it will be a great help for all the postgraduates to really focus on how to examine an ankle and foot. There are a couple of points that we can add in the discussion, but I think if Gopakumar sir is around, let him make his comments, then I'll add one or two points on which the students can have some more hints.
Gopakumar sir. I'm not seeing sir in the list, sir, as of now. He joined, but now he's not in the list. Probably sir might have left the.
I think sir is having an internet problem in the beginning itself, actually, sir. His
Right,
voice
sir.
was breaking.
Sandan Kakatkar, sir.
Dr.
You
Sharma,
could add
and Dr. Kalra sir and
Mohanty, sir.
Kalra sir. Yeah, I think Shubhranshu is there. I saw his comments.
No. It was an excellent presentation. Actually, a lot of things to learn. During postgraduate examination, especially elbow and ankle examination, most of the students, they fumble there. While showing the examination of the ankle joint, subtalar joint, and mid-tarsal joint, what we tell CTV. During CTV, when you show the ankle dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, subtalar movement, inversion, eversion, and abduction and adduction. Most of the students, they are not clear about that. I would recommend that all the students, whatever, Jagdish sir has told, go and practice, even in the normal foot with your friends. You just do this examination, how to do inversion, eversion. First you dorsiflex, lock the talus in the ankle, then you hold the calcaneus to do the inversion, eversion. That most of the people don't understand, they get confused during that examination. And elbow also, that to get those epicondyles, that triangular bony relationship, most of the 90%, 95% candidates, they fumble in the examination. Otherwise, it was an excellent examination. So as we go on discussing the cases, we'll again highlight more and more about this examination. Thank you, Jagdish sir, for your nice presentation.
Shivananda, sir.
Sir, hello.
Yes, your comments.
Sir. Excellent talk, sir. Excellent demonstration of pictures and everything is very nice, sir. I learned a lot. Thank you, Jagdish, sir.
Sir.
Sir, any extra point or some mnemonic?
Today, no mnemonic, sir.
Jagdish, sir.
Kalra sir, any comments?
Kalra, sir.
Yeah, he is there.
Right, sir. Kalra, sir.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
So it was excellent talk. There is another point I just want to add. Sometimes you can have a foot impression. That can also give you some more ideas like plantigrade, other pressure points where you metatarsals are more pointing. That is a photography, they call it, something like that. So they also is helpful. It is helpful, like flat foot, arch foot. You can make it out from that impression.
Footprints.
Patnaik, sir. Patnaik, sir. Sir, your comments.
Sir, excellent presentation. I learned so many things from the presentation. The pictures were just too good.
Today, I would like to take comments from Jain, sir.
Yeah, I was wanting to say that we have a paper published on pedogram for pes plenis in athletes. And on the basis of that, we provide prescribe medial arch support for those players. And then what are the problems, and what help they get, is a paper which is a thesis paper done in sports medicine in our institute.
Right, sir. Sir,
One more
I will request you
thing,
to share the
Jagdish sir.
article, sir.
Yeah, Jagdish sir. One common problem, the students usually don't differentiate between a partial foot drop and a complete foot drop. If you can clarify it on that.
Uh, I didn't understand the concept of a partial foot drop.
Yeah, even I don't know, but there are a few examiners who ask on to this. Differentiate a partial foot drop and a complete foot drop. I don't know because I heard it in one of the exams.
Okay, I don't know. In the foot drop, I've actually heard usually the usual questions are the causes of foot drop, and sometimes
Yeah.
it can typically, though we commonly say a nerve injury, and remember that the nerve injury could extend from the L4 root right to the common peroneal nerve to the deep peroneal. Anywhere in that arc, you can get a foot drop. Sometimes a very common thing which we don't describe as a foot drop is typically a open fracture which has actually severed the tendons of the tibant and the toes and all.
Yeah.
And we find that the foot, actually that is also a traumatic foot drop, which is not due to neurological causes. But unless you qualify it, it's typically a foot drop, you have to blame it on a neurological cause. I must confess, I have not heard the term partial foot drop. I don't know what it is.
Can I add one or two points?
This was a question asked by Gopa Kumar.
Okay.
Sir.
I think if he could have been there, he could have clarified the matter. There are one or two points I would like to add. Many a times during your day-to-day practice also, when you are seeing the cases of ankle foot problems, it is advisable to have a look at their shoe wear. Number of times that gives you a good clue about their faulty weight bearing. How much is the wear and tear on which side of the shoe wear there is a excessive wear tear, that how the weight bearing is going on. That's one point. Some of the examiners are fond of asking whether you have seen a shoe wear, and that is also important in the day-to-day practice. That is one point. Second point is I have seen some of the examiners asking that without touching the patient, if there is a weakness in the foot, whether just on seeing the gait, you can analyze whether there is a tendoachilles weakness or whether there is a tibialis anterior weakness. Nowadays, we don't see many polio cases, but then this was one of the questions which was very favorite during the times that we used to have at least one polio case in the exams. So by just seeing the gait, whether the clawing of the toes takes place in the stance phase or whether it takes in a swing phase, you can identify whether the weakness is in the tendoachilles or in the tibialis anterior. If you find that in a stance phase the toes get clawed, that gives you an hint that the tendoachilles is weak, because of which he is using the long flexors of the toes to stabilize himself when he's on a single leg weight bearing position in a stance phase. And when he's in a swing phase, if you get clawing of the toes, then if the tibialis anterior is weak, when they take a swing phase, the long extensors are used, so they get clawing of the toes. So that gives you an idea without touching, without examining, whether there is a tibialis anterior weakness or the tendoachilles weakness just by watching their gait. So that can be one more additional point which can be added into the examination.
Sir, my question is to Jain sir, Jagdish sir, and Kakatkar sir, and also Kalra sir. Sir, in exam, if examiner asks to the postgraduate regarding measurements and case is malunited calcaneum, is this measurement part is significant from tip of medial malleolus to floor and tip of lateral malleolus to floor? And also, how will student measure the width of the heel? Means in measurements, this tip of malleolus to the floor distance on affected and unaffected side, and how to measure the width of the heel. Whether student should know, and if student should know, how he should measure that part. Jagdish sir.
That is why I had put a query in my presentation, because it is a little ambiguous area. There are textbooks which describe exactly what you're describing, that is the distance of the malleoli from the floor, which typically would occur when the calcaneum is crushed and it has gone down, or when you have severe arthritis of the subtalar joint and there is collapse. I must say that I don't insist on it. That's why I said one of the measurements that we sometimes do is a circumferential measurement of the ankle around the heel, which tells us that the ankle is swollen. Sometimes that also helps us to tell whether there is a opening up of the mortise. Let's say typically a pronation external rotation injury and the syndesmosis has ruptured and that has become malunited. So what has happened is the entire ankle is opened up. The dimension have changed. So sometimes there is in fact, our textbook Das describes a circumferential measurement of the ankle for the width of the ankle. The calcaneum, if a candidate says, I don't mind. If he doesn't say also, I don't mind.
Right, sir. Jain sir. Please unmute.
Same as Jagdish sir said, I'll also won't insist on the exact measurements, but a circumferential measurement. Sometimes students do carry vernier calipers with them. That is something that they can mention about. It's not necessary to have it always.
Actually, it is in the contest which is taken as. It is not that we are particular to know the measurement. We want to know whether the boy knows the complications of a calcaneal fracture or not, long term.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if he says broadening of the heel is good enough.
Right, sir. Sivananda sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Kalra sir, please.
It is a contest which is better that he understands the principles.
True.
Right, sir. Sivananda sir.
Till Shivananda tells one more test in acute injuries that you can do for the syndesmotic injuries is a compression test. You know, you can just compress from medial and lateral side, and the patient will point with his finger that his pain is there right in the front area of the syndesmosis. You know, so that is one test which number of times is useful to find out whether there is any syndesmotic injury or there is a tibio-talar or talofibular ligament injury. You know, if there is a compression test which gives pain, then you know that it is more in favor of a syndesmotic injury.
The foot and ankle is given as a short case only.
Yeah.
So it starts from the diagnosis itself.
Hmm.
So it is and the very little time is there for the student. You need to know the principles only, whether he understands the problem or not.
Sir. Sivananda sir.
Sir.
Yes, sir. Your comment regarding measurements around the ankle joint. I think his net is having some issue. Mohanty sir.
My net is very
No, you know.
Sir, please go ahead. Sivananda, Mohanty sir.
No, means we are not very particular about the measurements around the ankle joint. I agree with with Jagdish and also Kalra sir. So just I wanted to add one more point that sometimes it is asked how to demonstrate the clawing phenomenon. People don't are not able to answer that. Clawing of the toes, as described by Jagdish sir, is that hyperextension at the ends, metatarso-phalangeal joint, and flexion of the interphalangeal joints. So how to demonstrate the clawing phenomenon? You passively correct the hyperextension of metatarso-phalangeal joint, then automatically the interphalangeal joints gets extended. That is how you demonstrate. Even in the hand, how to demonstrate, because it is most of the time it occurs due to the fixed length phenomenon, fixed tendon length phenomenon. So when you clawing is like this, suppose it is, so you passively you correct, so automatically interphalangeal joint gets extended. That is how you demonstrate the clawing phenomenon. So if you have understood the mechanism, then you can answer this.
I think that is an important point which sir has, which probably I have missed out, is sometimes if you have a trauma case, you would get the equivalent of a Walkman sign also in the foot, and where you see clawing, and you see with the movements of the ankle, the degree of clawing will change. So that finding is also very subtle, and unless you know that you have to look for it, you might miss it. And it's not uncommon, especially in a trauma setup, that you have VIC of the tendons also, a Walkman ischemic contracture.
Right, sir. Sir, Kanoja sir, while on wheels, your comment, sir.
Or is in transit, I think.
Yeah, he is traveling to Mumbai.
Unmute, sir. Unmute. Unmute, sir. I think, yes, sir.
A very nice presentation. I was lucky to hear it. Otherwise, I was going to ask you for recording. But the signal was throughout. 90% I could get it. Jagdish sir has presented very nicely, and this should be, students should note it properly, so that next presentation they should not miss anything.
Sir, what I will do, once presentation is okay, and if it is okay with Jagdish sir, I will provide them link for 48 hours. For 48 hours only, link will be there, so that they will read it. They will revise it 2-3 times, and then they will have, if they are having any issues, they should go through the books. Because while reading the books, they will get another 10-12 more points on the same topic, and they will be able to answer the question in the exam in a twisted form also when question is asked. So if it is okay with Jagdish sir and Kakatkar sir permits, today night I will put this link maybe for 2 to 3 days.
Yes.
Even I will revise. So many things I have learned.
All of us, we always learn, in every session, we always learn something,
Kalra sir, your comment, sir. Today I am having 21 minutes in my hand, still 21 minutes.
Yes. Do we have anything further?
Sir, I had kept time of about 40 minutes for the presentation.
Okay. Do we have anything, any other presentation? No.
No, sir. No, sir.
So that's all. We can wind it up and say good night.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
If there are any questions from the students, I think we can just clarify them.
Sir, nowadays students don't ask any questions.
Only
No question out chat box.
Faculties only ask questions. Yeah.
I will try and get the comment from Shivananda sir before we will proceed to the concluding comments. Shivananda sir.
Sir, my net is not good, sir, here.
But your voice is very good,
Hello?
sir. You can speak now.
Hello?
Your voice is okay. You can speak.
Sir, tell me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes,
but,
yes.
But I am unable to audible. Hello?
Yes, we are listening you, sir.
Sir, tell me, sir.
Sir, any comment from your side?
No, sir, no comment. Today's class is good. It's good.
Okay, sir. I think
But this is
students.
an extensive talk, sir. This one, it takes minimum at least 2 to 3 hours. This is a foot and ankle examination is very tough. And we are not used to that. That is the main problem. Just it is not like hip and knee joint. That is the main issue.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. I think students should remember at least minimum essential things they should remember while presenting the foot and ankle case. We are thankful to Jagdish sir for very self-explanatory images and in nutshell, Gagar mein Sagar is one saying. So a huge topic consolidated in a very crisp form. So again, clear, crisp, concept clearing talk. So thank you very much, sir. I would like to take concluding comments from Kakatkar sir, and then we will call off the day. Kakatkar sir, please.
I think the students and all of us are lucky to have Jagdish with us, and it was an excellent talk, not only from the point of view of the examination for the students, but I think for their careers, because you are going to have these cases of ankle foot problems in your day-to-day practice also. I think if you follow this system of examination and if you go according to these steps that are explained, I think you will not miss anything. Not only you will do well in the examination that you are going to face, but even in your practice as an orthopedic surgeon, I think this talk will go a long way. I think we must thank Jagdish for an excellent talk, and we expect all the students now to next few classes. They should present the ankle foot cases so that we will come to know where uh, anything is missing from their presentations. Thank you. Thank you, Jagdish. It was an excellent talk.